G'day guys, this is Holy Critics signing in with a fresh rant today, and I have been super excited to talk about this very topic which I'm about to get into with you. Now, I had the opportunity, fortunately this week, to watch, what should I call it? A bootleg copy of Johnny Depp's new movie, which is a crime thriller, City of Lies. Most of you probably haven't heard of this movie before or have seen the trailer a while back and never heard any follow-up to it. But I can't praise this movie enough. It's Johnny Depp's best performance in recent memory, other than where he played Whitey Bulger in Black Mass, which I also liked. And if you didn't know what it was about, it actually follows the true-to-life story of LAPD homicide detective Russell Poole and his investigation into the assassination of Notorious B.I.G., otherwise known as Biggie Smalls or Christopher Wallace. That was his birth name. And if you can cast your mind back to the 1990s, I was a bit too young to remember all the happenings in that decade, but you might have remembered that the city of Los Angeles was basically falling apart at the seams. There was the riots, there was the OJ trial, there was a lot of race politics going on, and open gang warfare in the streets, lots of homicides and murders that went unsolved. And at the heart of it was the gangster rap scene, headed by two notable figures. One being Notorious B.I.G., who belonged to the East Coast record label Bad Boy Records, and he was competing with Tupac Shakur, who belonged to Death Row Records, headed by Suge Knight, he's now serving time basically for the rest of his life in prison for a hit and run, but he's done a lot more than that. And this is where Johnny Depp's character, Detective Russell Poole, enters the scene. Because initially he's late to the game because Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. have already been assassinated by this point and their cases have gone cold. But he is tasked with solving a bizarre road rage incident involving two undercover LAPD officers where there was a shootout at a public intersection and one of the officers is killed in the altercation. And initially, he, like everybody else, is baffled by the case. They can't understand why these officers would flagrantly flout the law and conduct themselves in such an unprofessional manner, in a violent manner. And as the case goes on, and he gets deeper and deeper into his research and investigation, he uncovers a web of lies and a web of deception that the LAPD have been conducting themselves with, especially in regards to their gang divisions, where officers who were supposed to infiltrate these gangs, like the one that Tupac Shakur belonged to, Death Row Records, and get the intel in order to get convictions on these criminal syndicates, have instead been turned, almost as if they're double agents, to join with the gang and actually serve the gang and their illegal activities at the same time. And all covered up by LAPD headquarters and hushed to the media. And the movie fantastically depicts all these scattered events, which I initially didn't connect the dots on, and shows a pattern of deep-seated corruption in the LAPD, which, if true, could bring the whole thing crashing down. And if this movie was released theatrically, Johnny Depp and even Forrest Whitaker, who plays a reporter, would have easily got Oscar nods, in my opinion. It is a top-notch, A-grade production that I can't understand on face value why it hasn't been released to the public. But as I've done my own research on this conspiracy, I guess you'd call it, I've come to three possible conclusions, which I'm going to share with you in a second, as to why this movie may never be seen, or at least legally seen. And I'll start with the most obvious one. Now, a lot of you guys aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but I think it is a plausible explanation as to why this movie hasn't been released. And it relates to Johnny Depp's behaviour in the last 2 to 3 years. Now, there are reports that were leaking out early last year, before the film's delayed release, initially in May of 2018, that he had actually attacked a member of the crew on the set of the production and punched him in a drunken rage. Now, of course, he vehemently defends himself, as he always does, but it shows a pattern of behaviour which makes his brand almost unsellable for a company, a production company. And I know I copped a lot of backlash for the video I made on Johnny Depp's breakup with his ex-partner Amber Heard, and a lot of you said that she's a gold digger and she's making up these videos and pictures of his violent actions and his bruising and all this. You could say, well, she could do that herself. And I agree, it's still up in the air and we've got to wait to see what the court case comes to. But his pattern of behaviour is the concern at the moment, and his erratic actions. Specifically, not just this incident on the set, but also his bodyguards, who have actually claimed that he exposed them to illegal substances on the job and loaded weapons. These are his bodyguards. They said that he didn't pay them overtime and didn't class them as his employees, which has resulted in a $25 million lawsuit. And he's had a lot of problems with his management lately. He's had counterclaims and defamation suits, and it's all highlighting problems. Now, I know these things can tend to pile on and people can jump on you when you're weakened, and I haven't made any claims as to Johnny Depp's guilt or innocence, but it is a concern. And if you think about it from the perspective of the movie production company that were funding City of Lies, you can certainly understand why they might have reservations when it comes to releasing this movie, because it could become a PR nightmare. And they think that just by shelving it and never thinking about it again, maybe it can save them collateral damage. So that's my first theory. It's not the strongest one, but I think it's plausible. So moving on to theory number 2, and this one's quite simple and probably the most logical of the lot, and that relates to the bankruptcy of the production company behind City of Lies, Global Road, who filed for Chapter 11 protection in September of 2018, which coincidentally was the same month that the movie was planned to be released. But because the company went bankrupt, they pulled the whole movie from the cinemas, and we haven't heard about it since. And this could relate to the fact that the company simply can't afford to promote it. And they've got no money to advertise or anything along those lines. But there is one problem with the theory, and that is, if it costs them $50 million to make and they owe their debtors tens of millions of dollars, wouldn't it make more sense to just release the movie in cinemas anyway and rely on word of mouth? Because you're going to recoup some money. As soon as people hear that there's a Johnny Depp and Forrest Whitaker movie, they'll want to go see it because he's a great actor. I haven't denied that. And his name alone sells movies, so you think they would at least try to recoup some money from it rather than just take the loss and basically set themselves up for lawsuits with their creditors. So it probably is the most logical, but then there's a few things that put doubt in my mind, so I wouldn't say this is my strongest theory of all. All right, so now we're down to the final theory. And this one's really, really juicy and conspiratorial, and I love my conspiracies. let's think about it for a second. The movie itself implicates two groups of people. It implicates the death row records, who are still operating today, might I add, and the LAPD, who are their own gang. Let's call them that. This movie won't be making any friends with either of those groups, who have continued on their way, and these cases have remained unsolved, and they're very happy for them to remain unsolved. And the director of the movie, by the name of Brad Furman, has made it quite clear, in no uncertain terms, that during the making of the movie, he was threatened. And I won't put words in his mouth. This is what he said. Director Brad Furman thinks that there may be something sinister going on with the Los Angeles Police Department after multiple parties close to the case warned him not to make the film. So this is before the production. But during the production, one of his friends from the LA underworld advised him against continuing. A man he hadn't heard of for 15 years contacted him out of the blue, advising him to, quote unquote, get a burner phone, a disposable phone, and to cover the camera on his computer so no one could hijack his laptop and figure out a way to frame him. The director says, I already knew I was going to be banging up against the police in making this movie, and that's something I had to accept in service of truth and justice. The threat was real since day one, and I decided back then I couldn't let anything bully me or this story. But the insanity of this situation is at a point where I walk into my home alone and find myself like a 13-year-old kid checking my doors. Talk about extreme paranoia. The reality is, and this is probably what I think happened, the production crew were threatened while filming. Once the LAPD figured out what the content of the movie was going to be about and potentially the lawsuits that could come from it, think about the families of Notorious B.I.G. His family could sue the LAPD because an undercover officer may or may not have killed him or assassinated him. Think about that. That's a big lawsuit. That could bring down the whole thing. And this movie could stoke that fire, and they want to quash it because the corruption hasn't gone away, ladies and gentlemen. That's my theory. And all those other things like Johnny Depp's behavior and the bankruptcy have all just been sort of like contributing factors, but the real reason is the production company are afraid of what could come of this movie if the American public are able to view it, which they haven't been yet. I'm lucky and I got a bootleg copy. I won't tell you how I got it either. It was a bit of a process, but I got it. And I think they'll take the $50 million loss instead of face the potential consequences of releasing it. All right, I think I've spoken enough on the topic now, but if you are still interested in learning more, make sure you head over to the Daily Beast and check out the article entitled Inside the Shocking Death of Johnny Depp's Biggie Murder Movie City of Lies. It's a very, very fascinating read, and it's quite long and lengthy, but you get the whole crux of the issue just from reading that. And make sure you also leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode, and also leave a comment and tell me what your theory is. Do you think I was right on any one of the ones I presented, or do you think it's a combination of different ones? Please share your thoughts below. And like I mentioned earlier, I have made an episode on Johnny Depp's breakup with Amber Heard. So if you are interested in watching that, I'll leave a link over on the left of screen for you guys to watch it later or after this episode. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. And this is Holy Critic signing out.